Coming up on the first episode of the Ensemble PSG Podcast, presented by PSG Talk, we're talking about the end of the Ligue season, potential transfers, Ballon d'Or favorites, and so much more. Before we get started though, let me tell you about our new name here and the goal behind it. After nearly a decade of podcasting, I think we've done over 350 episodes now, we looked around and thought, it's time for a change. We should probably freshen things up a little bit. So this weekend, we rebranded our Substack, which is the premium extension of PSG Talk, from PSG Talk Extra Time to Ensemble PSG. So let me break it all down for you. We have our flagship website, psgtalk.com. That's going to be your place to go for free news articles. And then we have Ensemble PSG here on Substack, where you can get premium content such as this podcast that you're listening to right now. We really are trying to create a community here for PSG fans, which is why we wanted to add a new perk for subscribers, which is the opportunity to join our Discord server so that you can chat and interact with fans all around the world. So if you are a subscriber, if you do subscribe and you want access to that server, shoot me a message and we'll make sure you get an invite link and we'll get you all set up. We're also going to be setting up a store in the coming days so you can get some cool merch to show that you belong to this community. So t-shirts, magnets, glassware, all that good stuff. So if you want to subscribe, it's $5 a month, $50 for the whole year. I do hope you consider subscribing and support what we do here. Really would appreciate that. All right, let's get to today's show because we've got a great guest. We're having a conversation with Robin Bairner. He's a French football expert, chief editor over at Football Transfers. We get his thoughts on the potential changes to Ligue 1. We get his main takeaways from the Ligue 1 season, Ousmane Dembélé's Ballon d'Or chances. We even get to our old friend, Xavi Simons, who appears to be on the move once again. But first, here's our new intro. Robin, it's been a while since we had the opportunity to catch up. How are things on your end?
Yeah, they're good, thanks. And it's been far too long. We really need to make sure we do this more regularly.
Yeah, I mean, since we've talked, a lot has happened. I guess let me just get your thoughts just real quick. PSG in the Champions League final. Did you ever think this would actually happen?
I mean, it's superb, isn't it? No, I didn't. Not this season. I think PSG were inevitably going to make a breakthrough in Europe at some stage. And obviously, at the start of the season, Nasser Al-Khelaifi was coming out and saying that the Champions League's no longer the big goal. But I think realistically, everybody knew that the Champions League was still what PSG really wanted to win. I think he was playing down expectations at that time because obviously the team's far too young to be in the position that they're in. Really, they've played supremely well and they've exceeded all expectations. And I think it's been a great story because everybody's seen the way that they've played, having been a kind of bogeyman at least in the UK because of the ownership and all the big spending. That's almost been brushed aside to some extent because they have been so outstanding to watch, and it's really been a really nice breath of fresh air because I think particularly in the UK we're so inundated and saturated with Premier League coverage, and the excitement there in terms of the games and the way that teams are playing isn't there. And to have PSG kind of playing in midweek and showing what football should be played like, it's been really nice, and it's very much deserved. And hopefully now that they can go on and go all the way and kind of shake this monkey off their back, if you like.
It'd be the perfect end to what's been a great season, unexpected season. I mean, I kind of thought maybe if they could get to the knockout stage that we would be happy, and then beginning of the season it looked like they may not even qualify, and then a few short months later we're getting ready for a final. I was watching, I think Inter is playing Napoli as we're recording here on Sunday, so I've been keeping an eye on them. So yeah, it's unbelievable they've made it. So let's get into some of these topics, Robin. I wanted to start with something that we talked about on the last episode, and that is some interesting proposals regarding Ligue 1. The LFP could be going away. There's been talk of a playoff coming to the French League. Now, I know you're a fan of the Scottish League, which I believe, if I understand, they split the league in half after 33 games. So kind of along those lines, do you have a unique idea that you think could shake up Ligue 1, or would you leave it as is?
Well, I think essentially something needs to be done to make Ligue 1 more entertaining and more eye-catching for neutrals, if you like, because visibility is key for Ligue 1 here, and making money is key, and that means getting people to watch, basically. Now, obviously PSG, we've talked about how good they've been. Having them as such a dominant team in Ligue 1 is not necessarily a good thing, and obviously we've seen the issues that Ligue 1's got with television rights. And I don't think Ligue 1 is going to be unique in this situation. It just happens to be that Ligue 1's television rights finished first. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is a bursting of the bubble in terms of television money in general across the board in terms of European football. The Premier League will probably end up being at least somewhat immune to it. But equally, this is a challenge for French football, but it could also be a very interesting opportunity for French football because it gives the LFP, or at least the top clubs in France, the opportunity to innovate and potentially come up with an idea that's completely unique and can captivate viewers. And obviously, being European, I should say the playoffs are a terrible idea. Because it's so against everything that sort of European football fans are used to, and the sort of traditions of the game, if you like. But I have to say,
let me ask you about that, because I've been getting a lot of pushback. Do Europeans hate it because it is a more American thing, or they actually think it's a bad premise for these leagues? Like, which one is it?
I don't think it's anything to do with the American aspect of it. I think it's more to do with traditionalism and what's happened in the past and what's always been seen as right and fair, if you like. The idea that somebody could win a league or I say win a league in inverted commas, I guess. But the idea that somebody could win a league but then not be crowned the champions is kind of counterintuitive to what European culture has been, or European football culture, I should say, has been brought in fact, sporting culture. It's kind of counterintuitive to all of that, and 150 years worth of league football or whatever. So I think it's nothing to do with Americanism or anything like that. I think it's more just the fact that it's something different. And I think at the moment French football probably needs something different. Something to draw viewers in, and this could be a worthwhile idea, at least to experiment with over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. I know that it's been tipped as a sort of 4-team playoff. I'd probably like to see it expanded to maybe something like 8. But yeah, I'm open to the idea. It's something I initially railed against and didn't like, but then having thought about it a little bit, I think it's potentially worth trying.
Yeah, I guess, here in the States, take baseball, for example. They've been playing that for over 100 years, and they just recently, in the past season or two, there's now a pitch clock. There was too much standing around, spitting, and wasting time. Now you've got a certain amount of seconds before that you have to, pitch the next ball. And so, what other innovations? The 3-point line in basketball, they push that back. So, these American sports that have been around a while, they're finding that we need to innovate. Maybe the game is getting a little bit too slow, or maybe the players have gotten too good. I'm not saying change the rules of football by no means, but are there things in the way that the league works that you could move around? If it's not a playoff, what could it be? Like I said at the beginning with the Scottish League kind of splitting, and I know that's even a little bit controversial. Some people like it, some people don't. So there's got to be some way to make things interesting, because PSG have dominated. I think they've only lost twice the league in the past decade with Luis Enrique in place and this young team. Do we want another decade of dominance where PSG are winning by, I want to give them credit on Twitter, it was at PSG_Qatar HQ. Over the past decade, the Ligue 1 had been separated between first and second place by 12.27 points. Do we want that every season? I don't think anybody wants that. We like winning the league, but La Liga is at 4.82 points. That seems to be a little bit better. So I don't know. Just any other Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up this topic? Just anything that you think could change in the French league to just make it more competitive, other than the other teams getting their stuff together and competing a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, for sure that has to be an issue because cutting the league in terms of the numbers to 18, that should open itself up to teams becoming more competitive. And if you look at a club like Marseille, for example, this season, they should have been infinitely more competitive with PSG because they didn't have any European football to contend with. And obviously PSG had all this string of really, really tough games in the autumn when they should have been, I don't want to say overtaken in the league, but they should have at least been pushed to some extent. And this season it doesn't feel like they've been pushed because nobody else has been able to become competitive enough. So I think what you really need is some more money being invested somewhere and a sort of genuine rivalry manifesting itself, because I know you mentioned the Spanish league there, but really in Spain you've got Barcelona and Real Madrid. It's not quite a duopoly because you've got Atletico Madrid who have come in and pinched the league on a couple of occasions over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. But what's keeping La Liga afloat is this historical rivalry, and France misses that to some extent. We all love Le Classique and PSG and Marseille, but at the moment even that's too one-sided from a neutral perspective. And it's great watching PSG play brilliant football and winning the league every year, but at the same time as a product as a whole, it kind of diminishes Ligue 1 to some extent. And yeah, I don't think you can really have another decade of PSG dominance and see the league as being in a healthy state. That being said, the Bundesliga seems to do okay, and Bayern Munich have just won. Obviously didn't win last year, but prior to that they had won 10 in a row. So maybe there's something we could look at in Germany, but they've not really innovated in any way, and there's got to be some room for some innovation somewhere. We've seen Arsene Wenger, for example, speak in the past about goals being given as points, but equally that really wouldn't work in Ligue 1 because PSG can just blow somebody away 5 or 6-0 much more regularly than anybody else can. So yeah, I think you've got to look at the way the league's set up somehow, and I think playoffs or at least some kind of post-season competition could be the way of doing that, whether that involves a split from the top 4, 6 or whatever. There's got to be something that can be looked at.
I like that. All right, let's put a pin in that topic because it's just something, after we did that episode, there was a lot more feedback than typically is. So I think this is something that is at the top of a lot of people's minds. A lot of people have very strong opinions on it. And I guess at the end of the day, I'm just glad they're talking about it. The discussions are being had, especially with the LFP hopefully going away and adopting a more Premier League style of just structure of the French league. So we'll see what happens with that, but I love that the proposals are out there. The league on season... Oh, go ahead. Yeah, jump in
for a quick second. I think French football as well, and it is in a better state to jump in and do something like the Premier League than it was in England, for example, because there's such a big difference between, say, the top 20 or 30 clubs in France compared to, say, the next 20 or 30, because you can get to some really sort of amateurish clubs there who are only attracting relatively modest crowds of 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, relatively small crowds. Whereas in England, you go down the leagues, everybody in the top sort of 4 divisions is all attracting, multiple thousands of people. So I just think that, adopting a more streamlined approach in France is perhaps more logical than it was in England, and we've seen how well it's worked in England. Obviously, France are jumping on this bandwagon maybe 35 years too late, but there's still room for success there.
If they can get that going, if they can up the marketing of the league and get more eyeballs and people watching it, because now you've got PSG playing this attractive style of football, they're in the Champions League final, get the marketing out there. But for me, this summer, all eyes are on Paris FC. You've got this great rival, literally next door to you. They need to invest in their squad. They need to bring in some players. I was kind of halfway joking Cristiano Ronaldo to Paris FC. They splash the cash. Let's get some big names. Let's get a rivalry going. I think that'd be amazing.
That would be amazing, having Ronaldo at Paris FC, and having this messy sort of history at PSG. It'd be brilliant. The comparisons would be unbelievable. You would definitely get eyeballs, put it that way.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Paris FC, make it happen. So the Ligue 1 season did come to an end yesterday on Saturday. PSG defeating Angers 3-1. The photos from the celebration are still coming out. I've been liking and resharing all of those. And it was one hell of a celebration, actually. It wasn't the invincible season that I was hoping for, and many other were hoping for, but still great achievement nonetheless. What will you remember from PSG's Ligue 1 campaign this season? What kind of stands out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the flair with which the teams played. I mean, for me, watching Désiré Doué has been a particular joy in the second half of the season. He's really impressed me in terms of his whole game, I suppose, his efficiency, and just the flair he plays with, the sort of carefree nature of his game, and just how effective he is. It's been very impressive for me to watch. I knew when he was coming to PSG that he was a very exciting player. I didn't expect him to have this impact so early in the campaign, and for me, he just kind of sums up the whole PSG season. It's been a pleasant surprise, great to watch, plenty of goals, plenty of excitement, and obviously the promise of what's to come in the next 5-10 years. It's all very, very exciting.
I think for me, the indelible image of this season is Gianluigi Donnarumma taking that boot to the face. And we all joke about it, but that was really the turning point in his season. And he carried that on into the Champions League campaign, where he's kind of rescued PSG's butt several times against Liverpool and Aston Villa, just getting PSG to the final. So for me, that moment when he got kicked in the head, I mean, we were at that point, me and many others were like, let's look at the backups. Let's look at, who can we sign in January, in the summer. This guy is not it. He gets kicked in the head, and then all of a sudden he just turns it around completely and is just playing lights out. I mean, he's one of the best goalkeepers in the world, I think, right now. Great.
Yeah, I mean, I was entirely in your camp in the first half of the season. I came on here and suggested that he would be a player that PSG should look at selling this summer. I think it was probably in the aftermath of one of his Champions League mistakes. I think it might have been Atletico Madrid, but I'm not entirely sure. But what I would say about Donnarumma I think he's almost... And this is a complete U-turn from me. I think he's almost the perfect keeper for PSG, because, he'll make mistakes, and I think his mistakes tend to come in games where he's not asked to do an awful lot, but when the chips are really down and he's under pressure and he's forced to concentrate. And for me, the concentration is the key thing for Donnarumma. If he's forced to concentrate for 70 or 80 minutes in a game, he seems to be just infinitely better a goalkeeper than he is if he is sort of allowed to allow his mind to wander for 89 minutes. So he's perfect for these Champions League matches. We saw his save against Odegaard, which for me could be the best save anywhere this season. It was just out of this world. It was an impossible save. We've seen his ability from penalty shootouts against Liverpool. And also how much he's improved in terms of his box control against Liverpool and Arsenal as well. So, Donnarumma for me has been outstanding, mostly in the Champions League, which is why I didn't mention him on this occasion. But just an outstanding performer in the second half of the season, and for sure that Monaco kick will be unforgettable for all too many reasons, I guess.
Absolutely. And you're the transfer guru. I mean, this contract has not been signed yet. I mean, is there any possibility, if you had to put a percentage on it, I mean, could Donnarumma leave this summer? I mean, does he want to go back to Italy and play for a club there, or do you think he'll move on if they win the Champions League? Is that what he's waiting for? Like, hey, if I come here and win the Champions League, mission accomplished, I'm going to go elsewhere and just maybe go to Saudi or something and cash in?
I mean, my feeling is that Donnarumma's PSG's keeper as long as PSG want to have him. There's obviously these question marks over how good he is in terms of his play with his feet. and how much Luis Enrique wants a goalkeeper who can pass the ball to a better extent. But I think what we've seen from Donnarumma over the course of the last 3 or 4 months should really put those questions to bed. As I say, I think he's a very suitable goalkeeper for PSG in these clutch positions, which is the clutch positions in the Champions League is obviously where they need him to perform, because we've just discussed about how much of a cakewalk Ligue 1 should be for PSG. So for me, I think Donnarumma is going to stay at PSG and sign a new contract.
Yeah, quite the U-turn for you and myself and many others. We did not think we would be saying that. That's for sure. PSG, they've got 2 finals coming up to prepare for. They got the kind of overlooked Coupe de France final on May 24th, and then, of course, Champions League final on May 31st. If PSG goes on to win both of those, and Ousmane Dembélé maintains his high level of play, maybe gets a couple goals, in your opinion, Ballon d'Ors is pretty much his to win, or do you think Barcelona's Lamine Yamal might have done enough already to secure that? Talked about Mo Salah and Liverpool winning the Premier League. Kind of, if PSG can do the treble, does Ousmane Dembélé win the Ballon d'Or for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think next week's Coupe de France final is a match that I don't think anybody really cares about anymore. I mean, Reims have obviously been sent to the relegation playoff, and they've now got to play Metz on Wednesday, I think it is, and then they've got the second leg of that match the following Thursday. So that's a game that's going to kind of be on the back burner for them, and to some extent anyway. And equally for PSG, it's obviously not their big priority of the week either. So it's going to be a strange sort of match, that game, because it's going to be a game where nobody, obviously both teams want to win, but nobody really wants to get injured. So it's going to be a funny sort of cup final, and I don't think that sort of game is going to be really defining for Dembélé when it comes to the Ballon d'Or. I think what it's all about really is the match against Inter. Obviously, if he can be decisive in that game, he has got an outstanding shot of winning the Ballon d'Or. This year, and I say this year when I'm talking about 2025, he has been absolutely lights out in the Champions League, and I've guessed to most of the voters for the Ballon d'Or, that's really where they're going to be watching their football in terms of Dembélé, because Ligue 1 is just not visible enough, and we mentioned that before. But Dembélé has played 10 Champions League games in 2025. These have all been high stakes games, the Manchester City game and Stuttgart group stage game included. And in those games he has been decisive. He's got a goal or an assist in 8 of those games. He totals 8 goals and 3 assists in those games. He's been decisive in the knockout games. He's obviously scored against Arsenal, an assist against Arsenal. So if he gets the winner, or if he plays an important role against Inter for PSG to win, I think it's going to be very hard to overlook Dembélé for the Ballon d'Or. But that said, we've talked about visibility and we've talked about the marketability of Ligue 1 and the struggle that Ligue 1 has had to really kind of shine on the big stage, and that's going to cost Dembélé, or potentially cost Dembélé in this vote, because there's so much hype about Lamine Yamal at the moment. And when you watch him play, it's fully deserved, because this is just such a thrilling young talent. This is a 17-year-old kid who has carried Barcelona, at least to some extent, this season. Rafinha's also been very good. Maybe we could see the vote split there by the fact that there's 2 Barcelona players who have been so good. But I think Yamal is just the outstanding candidate to potentially, I don't want to say dethrone Dembélé, because that implies that he's already won it, but he's the outstanding candidate to take it from Dembélé. Salah, for me, has probably blown it in terms of his Champions League performance against PSG, because he was so locked down by Nuno Mendes. So I think if Dembélé wins it, then he's probably got to thank the left back to some extent, because he was so dominant against Salah in those games.
What do you think it would mean? I'm just curious to get your thought on this. Kylian Mbappe, I think he scored 41 goals, but they're going to go without Real Madrid, that is, go without a major trophy, and then he leaves and PSG are in the final. And here we are talking about essentially his replacement, potentially the leader for the Ballon d'Or. What does that do to his legacy that you leave and your replacement and your team does better than they ever did, with you in the team? I mean, is that an indictment on him, or what are your general thoughts on that?
Well, I guess there was the 2020 Champions League final that Mbappe led PSG to, or was part of that. So
I would say Neymar. Neymar was the catalyst for that one.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, but he was just part of the squad, let's say. But yeah, I think it's going to be tough on Mbappe because as much as the way he left was sour for PSG in such an incredible way, and we're seeing this roll over into the court case currently. He still had a huge impact in the history of the club, but I think just the way the team has flourished without him just kind of, I don't want to say puts a dampener on his legacy, but it certainly shows the way that the team was run and when he was here, and for sure it definitely is a mark against Mbappe and that sort of whole Neymar Messi era, that the fact that this relatively unheralded group of players, because when Dembélé arrived at PSG, he was almost a joke in terms of what he had done at Barcelona. Fair enough, he had gone on several outstanding runs and streaks of form, but he had never pieced anything together like he has now, and he had never been allowed to become a team leader. And obviously he's become this figure now that is indispensable to PSG, and it just doesn't reflect particularly well on Mbappe. I wouldn't say it necessarily wipes out his legacy, but it certainly is going to leave it questioned in 5, 10, 15 years.
He's got to win it next year, wouldn't you say? I mean, he has to.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, he's in so much trouble now in terms of his PSG legacy. It's in a lot of trouble.
And then just real quick, going back to Lamine Yamal, I do wonder, just given his age, I mean, if it's sort of neck and neck, I wonder if some of the voters will say, he's going to have a lot more years to win this thing, and Dembele's maybe towards, not the tail end, but he's certainly put in enough work and has been at this for a little bit longer than Yamal. I wonder if age and experience will play a role in the voting as well.
I just fear that Dembélé has been almost tarnished by his big money move to Barcelona, and almost been painted as a sort of flop figure at Camp Nou because of all of the injury problems. I just fear that this whole sort of narrative of Lamine Yamal winning it as a 17-year-old, 3 years younger than any other Ballon d'Or winner in history, Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, holds that at the moment. I just feel that the popular narrative at the moment is probably swinging towards Lamine at the moment, and I think his age it might actually count in his favour rather than against him, unfortunately.
We need better PR.
well, this is it. It's the whole problem with Ligue 1, and it's a Ligue 1 problem. It's a perception of Ligue 1 and all those things. It almost feels like what Dembélé has done domestically is written off, and all that matters is what happens in the Champions League. Whereas Lamine has got these classical performances under his belt, and those are good currency for him.
Scored a great goal, I think, was that today or yesterday? He scored a really nice shot. Yeah. He's a heck of a player, but hey, if Dembélé gets a hat trick and delivers PSG's first Champions League title, it's hard to argue with that. Robin, we're coming up on time, and I want to get your thoughts on all things transfers. We were kind of talking about an upcoming piece, and you're going to be looking at what PSG's transfer strategy might be now that they're in the final. Usually a team reaching the Champions League final, especially with PSG with a lot of young players, there's not going to be a lot of turnover. There's not going to be players leaving and that sort of thing. So kind of talk about what you think might be their strategy. Give us a little hint at the article. Are there maybe some players that you think would slot into this team and either add some depth or maybe a higher quality starter? Just kind of how do you see the summer transfer window shaping up for PSG?
Yeah, I think the transfer window at the moment is particularly complicated for PSG because the team that they've got currently is, it's such a delicate sort of balance in terms of the first team players they've got. It's an absolute team effort. There are outstanding individuals in there, of course, but it's not reliant on any single individual, which makes it almost more difficult to replace players in a way, because it means that you're tinkering with the balance of the squad. How does a certain player fit into the squad? Can he play in the style that Luis Enrique wants him to play? So I don't think there's going to be a big turnover. I think you mentioned that yourself. I think I'd be surprised if maybe more than 2 or 3 players came in. I think a centre back is inevitable because Kimpembe is looking done. Lucas Hernandez hasn't come back as strongly as you might have wished, and also Marquinhos for me still has question marks over him, so I think you need to be looking at centre back.
Do you think Gonzalo Ramos could be on the move? Maybe Kang-In Lee, 2 guys with a lot of quality, a lot of teams like, but just can't get into this team?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I really like Ramos. I wouldn't like to see him go, but there has been a bit of talk about PSG signing a centre forward built in Germany. We're talking about Serhou Guirassy, who is available relatively cheaply, I understand. I personally would keep Ramos. I mean, he seems to, as long as he's happy to play this sort of backup role. But Luis Enrique equally doesn't particularly seem to want to be pressed into playing a centre forward. He has spoken about it in the past. He said that just before the Manchester City fixture, for example, he was asked about this, and he said that if I had I'm paraphrasing here, but he said effectively, if I had a centre forward like Erling Haaland, he would start. Which was a slight on Ramos. Ramos apparently didn't take well, but you just can't see necessarily Luis Enrique tinkering with this team too much at the moment, because Dembélé through the middle is working. He's got exciting options out wide. I might like to see somebody like Ryan Cherki looked at, because I think he would be potentially just such a wonderful player to see in this PSG team in terms of the flair he can bring, and have that sort of Désiré Doué impact, and he can play several positions across the front line. I think that'd be very exciting and a very interesting signing. But I think ultimately you're really looking at young French players. Ayoub Badawi at Lille's one that I've noted down here, the 17-year-old. Obviously not coming in to be a starter at the moment, but certainly somebody who could potentially be looked at. And I mean, there are questions over Warren Zaire-Emery's future as well, obviously due to his apparent lack of enthusiasm as to posting socially about PSG in any sort of manner.
Of course, as soon as I buy his kit, he's on his way out, of course.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed it doesn't happen, because this is another wonderful player, and everybody wants to see the TTs coming through from the academy and making an impact, particularly when they're a guy who is as strong as Zaire-Emery. You don't want to see him going to Marseille and becoming Marseille's Player of the Year in 5 years' time, like Adrien Rabiot has this year. You want to see these guys succeed. So I think ultimately the balance is really about bringing players in, but also bringing players through and getting the likes of Sene Mayulu more game time, and really nailing them down at the club and working on this strategy to get these young Parisian players into the first team. And it's obviously a delicate balance, because the standards that PSG demand are so high in the first team. But it's complicated, and Luis Enrique has done really a fantastic job of doing that so far. So fingers crossed he can continue along those lines.
Speaking of young players, just real quick, one last question. It just popped into my mind. And I ask it because, PSG do have, or at least it's been reported that they have some kind of sell-on clause with Xavi Simons, and he's over at Leipzig, and they don't have any European football to offer him next season, so he's going to likely be leaving this summer. Where do you think, what club would he even go to? I'm so confused about his career. He could have stayed at Barcelona and been there, Champions League football. He could be at PSG right now. He could be the Désiré Doué player. He said that's not good enough, so he goes to Leipzig, and not so good. It doesn't work out for him. What club would pay upwards of 80 million euro for him right now, and is he ever going to be happy at a team?
Well, it's the Premier League. You can only look at the Premier League at the moment for Xavi Simons, and it's like you say, it's just such a wild career this kid's had, because he is obviously so fantastically talented. He's probably too confident. He's too much belief in his ability. I mean, apparently it's an attitude thing rather than anything else that's driven him out of PSG, which is so disappointing. But ultimately that's on him. If he isn't willing to fit into the ethic of the squad, then so be it, I suppose. But I think his talent is going to take him to the Premier League. I mean, there's so many clubs here that are desperate for attacking talent. Manchester United, for example, if they can get into the Champions League. Arsenal need another attacking midfielder. But I think there has to be questions over his attitude and how he can fit into these teams, how he copes if he is not a starter at these teams. It's going to be fascinating to see, because equally these clubs have got the Premier League's financial fair play, PSR, to contend with, and that's kind of curtailing them in the transfer market to some extent. So he's going to be a gamble, but he apparently is going to be a gamble that somebody's going to bet on. So let's see what happens to him.
Certainly be one to keep an eye on, and of course, like I said, PSG will get some percentage of wherever he goes and whatever that transfer fee might be. We follow an RB Leipzig RBL talk on X, and they've soured on him just like we have, and likely Barcelona fans have. So everywhere he goes, it's just a trail of destruction in his wake.
It's just not a good look for, especially somebody who's so young and talented. It's just red flags all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah, it seems like Manchester United is probably the best place for him. So, all right, Robin, let's leave it at that. Thank you so much for coming on. Remember, you can read Robin's work over at Football Transfers. Thank you all for listening and subscribing as well. We really appreciate your support. We'll have a lot more on all things PSG. But until next time, bye for now.